We've been at a high and then mid-altitude. What is it to be an Episcopalian? So now we're getting closer to the ground in this particular church. And so now to your handout packet. There are two things that are, this is street level, right? There are two things that are distinctive about this particular Episcopal church, the Church of the Good Shepherd. One of them is what we refer to as contemplative. We are a contemplative church. So we're going to talk about that briefly first. So, contemplation is a very old Christian word and theological concept. It's a little bit subtle and nuanced to try to define. Contemplation is an experience of union with God. I mean, already you're like, oh gosh, he's out there. An experience of union with God that is beyond thoughts, words, feelings, any of your senses. Contemplation is a vivid awareness that you don't know is happening when it's happening. So you got to hold the tension of that. It's a vivid awareness of my life received as pure gift from God, whose ground and my ground, source, are one inside of my body. When Jesus looked at the woman at the well, y'all remember this story? And he said, "Daughter of mine, if you knew who was talking to you, you would ask me, and I would give you a spring of eternal waters flowing up from within your very body." This is a glimpse, a sort of nod, a pointing to the gift of contemplation. Contemplation, this experience of union with God beyond sensory capacity, only, this is important, only comes as gift. So I can't make it happen. My experience of oneness or union with God, I cannot make it happen. But I can assume an inner stance that makes me vulnerable to receiving the gift. Did that make sense? When I say assume an inner stance, can you kind of feel what that means? So my buddy Zach, I can go to him, and I can go in a real closed down way, because I'm actually not open to what he has to say, because I'm a little bit irritated because he stepped on my toe yesterday, or I don't like the way he's doing X, Y, or Z. Does that make sense? So I can kind of go to him non-verbally, because I was raised down in Georgia. I was raised to be polite, right? But non-verbally, I can go to him kind of closed off. Are you with me? Or I can go, that's an inner stance of constriction, or I can go to him in a more open, see how I just opened my body? This is how we celebrate the Eucharist, by the way. It's called the Orans, O-R-A-N-S position. I can go to Zach. Good day, bad day, boring day, whatever. He's done well, he's done poorly, I've done well, I've done poorly, doesn't matter. I can go to him with an inner stance that's more open. Because tell me about your life. I just want to know you better. I want to love you better. I want to be able to connect with you better. So I go with this open. Now, I can't make him love me, like me, nothing, right? Can't make him. But I can go to him with a stance that makes me vulnerable. Does this word vulnerable work for you? Vulnerable to receiving what he has to give me. So this or this. So the contemplative church, this parish, this church, is a church that seeks to cultivate an environment in which her members, her people, can be safely hold this word lightly, easily. An environment in which they can safely and easily assume a stance that makes them vulnerable to being overtaken by the love of God, the gift of contemplation. So I say playfully, we garden for contemplation here. We can't make it happen, but we can create to the best of our ability conditions that are conducive to our receiving the gift. So 2 things about a contemplative church. 1, her members need to know contemplation is a thing, which a lot of people don't. Oh wait, union with God beyond sensory experience is a thing that's been taught about by the Christian mystics for hundreds and hundreds unto thousands of years. Yes, it is a thing. We know about it. We can learn about it. Thomas Merton, our good Kentucky monk, who died some time ago, but was based out of Gethsemane, outside of Bardstown, not far from here, taught about contemplation, so we can know it's a thing. So the contemplative church, we know contemplation is a thing. And then repeating myself, the second piece is we garden for contemplation. We create conditions that are conducive to the gift. So principles undergirding practices is an important core value for the contemplative church, because we need to be doing the things that we're doing for a reason, because all true sacred signs efface, that as they yield and deliver us into the presence of God. Thoughts, questions, comments about this particular church being what we call a contemplative church.
Another level of, I love the experience of
Yep.
God here.
Yep. It's very common for a follower of Jesus to be a part of a rhythm of life, whether it's a local church or one's own prayer life, that sort of takes an evolutionary trajectory. So the traditional church and church observance of my past takes me as far as it takes me, and that is wonderful. Mm-hmm. And then it's common, and I think this is what you and I share probably as I'm listening to your story. It's very common for then the follower of Jesus to need something more.
Or just another time, because I just feel like the Lord said, "Hey, you're done."
Yep.
Not angry,
Of course.
just, it's time to move on.
Right. Something different, something more, something deeper. We could keep going with the adjectives, and none of them is negative. They're just, and it's often that something different or more or next step is the contemplative dimension of the gospel and my faith life. So to find a place, which I found when I came to Good Shepherd, where people recognize the magnetism of contemplation, is often, as you're describing, a great comfort.
I like that when you use the word vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a reminder to me that, I need to be humble
Mm-hmm.
and put in the work in my relationship.
And to have a place where it's safe to do that,
Yes.
I think is important. And that's what we're trying to be.
Contemplative doesn't necessarily mean me and my practice by myself in private, right?
Right.
It could mean that,
Mm-hmm.
but you're talking about
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. That's really helpful. The contemplative community, the entire organism, as it were, has this contemplative resonance. It doesn't mean that every member of the church is a contemplative. It doesn't mean that every member of the church is even drawn to the contemplative dimension. Some members of the church, and this is totally fine by the way, hear us talk about contemplation and they're like, it's not what I'm there for. No problem. This leads into developmental church. The contemplative church just has that capacity, that resonance for the folks who are so called. One more thought about the contemplative church, and then we'll move on to the developmental church, and we'll wind down there. We do have contemplative prayer groups that meet here at Good Shepherd twice a week right now, Mondays at 5 and Thursdays at 5, where folks can come and being silent, often referred to as meditative prayer with other people, other members of the church, and community members sometimes will come. It's a great place to practice silent prayer in a group. It's also a great place to learn about silent contemplative prayer, and just sort of be a part of the fellowship of the contemplative garden that is present here at Good Shepherd Church. So just know that's out there, and whether it's me or some other member of our sort of contemplative crew, as it were, we'll be happy to talk to you anytime about that opportunity. Okay, so the final thing I want to look at today that's distinct about this particular church is what we refer to as the developmental church. Now, you've got a lot of stuff on your handout here, and I'm not going to go through it all with you. It's this is a resource for you. But the basics of the developmental church are this. We have a sense, based on science, that the universe, and I mean that literally, the whole universe is an evolutionary universe. God's technique for creation is evolution. That's just straight science. So a quick trip through the history of the universe. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe burst into being with a big bang, right? It starts off as a hot, dense soup of hydrogen. That's all that was present 13.8 billion years ago. A little bit of lithium, a little bit of helium, but mostly hydrogen. Hydrogen is the simplest, the lightest, and the most abundant element in the known universe. All the hydrogen that ever was or will be outside of a lab somewhere was created at the Big Bang. Your body has a reasonably high percentage of hydrogen present in it right this second. Right this second. All of the hydrogen in your body created way back when, nearly 13.8 billion years ago. Okay, we together so far? So if you leave hydrogen alone in a really good garden, that is our universe, turns out, almost 14 billion years later, to be precise, 300,000 years ago, you get a marvelous little creature, or creatures, called a Homo sapien. You are Homo sapiens, obviously. So, we came to be through the grace, power, strength, and mind-boggling miracle of evolution, which is God's technique for creation. So, shortly after Homo sapiens arrive on the scene, we develop, for the first time in this particular way, in the nearly 14 billion year history of the universe, consciousness. Some theologian/scientist combos say that Homo sapiens are evolution come to consciousness. We are the distinct parts of evolution, creatures in evolution, that can reflect on the fact that we are a part of evolving a universe, which always makes me smile, because it's just the coolest thing ever. Our consciousness itself in the last 200 to 300,000 years has evolved. There are different stages of consciousness online today. If you think about, I don't know if y'all went home or maybe people came to you for Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, your last holiday affair where you had a big bunch of your family tree together in the same house, maybe around the same table. And if you'd had this language, and maybe you do, but if you could have just sort of pressed pause on it and stepped back from it and looked at all the people, from your great uncle to your aunt over there to your little nephew and your 18-year-old, whatever it was, cousin, and you've been able to step back from it and you had this language, you could say these people are not all at the same stage of consciousness. Put another way, we're all coming from different places. Put another way, everybody's bringing a different gift to the table. Are you with me at all? And oh, by the way, some of us are bringing something that is decidedly not a gift to the table. We call it a shadow. I got a lot of shadow. I bring it to family functions sometimes. Are you with me? So what the developmental theory, often called integral theory, says is we are at different stages of consciousness. And each stage of consciousness is bringing a different set of values or value expression to bear on any given moment. So online today, and you can turn to this page right here with the 4 circles. Online today, in the world, and in the United States in particular, and in Good Shepherd Church in particular, there are 3 primary stages of consciousness operating in the human being. Traditional, modern, and progressive. And they've literally come online over time in history. The traditional stage of consciousness brings the values of heritage, law and order, faith, family, God and country. And it came online about 5,000 years ago. This is the stage of consciousness in which the Bible and all the world religions, including Judaism, Christianity, were born. Faith, family, God and country, law and order. I'm going to run through these and then I'll stop. The modern stage of consciousness comes on 300 to 500 years ago in the human community with the Enlightenment, Reformation, the birth of scientific reason. Think Galileo, think Thomas Jefferson, think in its sort of full bloom Albert Einstein, right? Modern stage of consciousness. The value set that, think birth of the United States of America, social democracy, departure from the law and order of the British monarchy, and this new experiment of a democracy in what we now call the United States of America, right? The value sets that come on in the modern stage of consciousness are liberty and fairness, and a realization that the individual has something to offer. And it's not all about just doing what I'm told to do by the group and the ruling hierarchy. Modern stage of consciousness, great gift to the human experience is modern medicine. Modern stage of consciousness is like the Cambrian explosion of scientific discovery. Liberty, fairness, a healthy egocentric sense of discovery and reason. Progressive stage of consciousness comes online 60 to 100 years ago. It comes online with the civil and human rights movements that crop up all over planet Earth, particularly in our country. Think Martin Luther King. Think the civil rights movements of the 1960s. The chief value that comes online in extraordinary robustness in the progressive stage of consciousness is the caring value set. This is the end of slavery in a 100-year period all over planet Earth. This is which starts in the modern stage of consciousness. This is why do we not give women the right to vote? This is 1920, the beginnings of the progressive, in 1920, where in our country where we would finally give women the right to vote. This is the beginning of gay people are not less than or other than or inherently like what? This is the beginning of all this deep, inclusive caring that begins to flourish in the value set of the human creature. Okay. All 3 of these stages of consciousness are online today. Fundamental teaching of developmental or integral philosophy is that individual human beings have a center of gravity, of a consciousness center of gravity in one of these spots along the way. So I always use my beloved, she's in heaven now, my beloved grandmother, who was a child of the Depression, greatest generation. My grandfather was a career officer in the United States Army. Traditional value set. That was her center of gravity. Raised in the church, raised her kids in the church, law and order, God and country, true depth dimension of patriotism, all good stuff. Huge C.S. Lewis fan. About as far out as my grandmother would get with the Chronicles of Narnia. Great. Fabulous traditional value set. That was her center of gravity for all her days. Got an uncle who's a science guy, a computer guy, science fiction guy, reason, math, magnificent guy. Just a prince of a guy. Center of gravity, perhaps the modern stage of consciousness. I always use my own 18-year-old daughter. She is, you bring me your people, she wins, I promise you. You don't want to compete. The most woke citizen of the Commonwealth of Kentucky is my 18-year-old daughter. Center of gravity, this is good, it's great. It's exactly where she should be. Center of gravity, progressive stage of consciousness. Are we together so far? So, it's marvelous. It's the flourishing of consciousness evolving in real time. Here's the downside. The downside is summarized in what we popularly call the culture wars. Turn on the news. You can see it unfold in real time. Don't turn on the news. But the downside, and the reason we have the culture wars, is that folks whose center of gravity is solidly in one stage of consciousness think that the other two are wrong. It's a sincerely held belief. They think that folks whose center of gravity is in another stage are just wrong. And so they have a conscious and an unconscious sort of agenda, compulsion to go get the folks in another stage and drag them back to where you are, because that is actually where you should be, because you're right. So my friends whose center of gravity is traditional want to go get my progressive friends and drag them back. Likewise, my progressive friends want to go get my traditional friends and drag them up or across or whatever. Does that sort of make sense? And this is why we can't get anything done. Okay, there's a fourth stage of consciousness. And my suspicion is that because none of you have walked out of the room yet, or maybe you are like me, were just raised in polite society, and so you're going to walk out soon and you won't come back, which is fine. My suspicion is that this fourth stage of consciousness is sort of emerging, or maybe it's in full bloom in you. It's called the integral stage. And it's the fourth of our little circles here. The integral stage of consciousness begins to come online, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, who knows. By the way, there's no clean breaks. It's more like the space between stages is more like ocean currents. You can't see ocean currents generally when you look out at the ocean, but once you get in there, you can feel them, right? So there's no clean breaks. It's just this flow. Okay, so the integral stage of consciousness, which is currently coming online, is the first of the stages that can see the whole map and appreciate that each stage of consciousness has something vital, and I mean that word literally, absolutely vital to offer to the whole. So my progressive center of gravity friends who really just want to X out my traditional center of gravity friends, you can't do that. Because you take this out, you don't have either of these. They're building blocks. Integral stage is the first one that can see that and can say to my grandmother, oh, please come to the table. We need somebody to teach the children the tradition of the church, the Our Father, and what a sacrament is. That's the heart of tradition, right? Oh, and bring your husband, my army officer grandfather, because we need somebody to teach us the value of healthy patriotism and service to country in a sacrificial manner. You don't want to get rid of that. You wouldn't dare get rid of that. That'd be a fool's errand. Likewise, I won't play them all out, but the modern stage of consciousness, while there's a downside to capitalism, right? There is. If you can't talk about the shadow of capitalism, then you just got your head in the sand. That sounded judgmental. But, come on. There is. But there's also a great flourishing gift to capitalism. The modern stage of consciousness got us a vaccine for a virus we didn't know anything about in a calendar year. put somebody on the moon, got us an electric car, is going to help us, hopefully, if we don't foul the nest too quickly, solve the problem of the degradation of the planet by the Industrial Revolution. Are we together? Science, you got to have it. Chemo, find me a cancer survivor who doesn't appreciate modern consciousness, right? That's how we got chemotherapy and radiation. Praise God. And then the progressive stage of consciousness brings this inclusivity to the table that I don't know how we ever lived without, to be honest with you. It treats people with the respect that their inherent dignity draws us to respect. So Integral can see this for the first time and says, everybody bring your gift to the party. And at the same time creates an environment in which folks whose center of gravity is at a particular place can be safe to be vulnerable, we'll use that word again, to name their own shadow. Because what integral theory tells us is that the person who's best positioned, see if you can get this, or you can get it, see if I can say it. The person who is best positioned to tend to the pathologies of each stage is the person whose center of gravity is at that stage. Did that make sense? If it were otherwise, we wouldn't have the culture wars. We wouldn't be locked up. Okay, so why do I say we're a developmental or integral church? Because we're a church that understands that evolution is our reality on a biological and cosmological level, but also on the level of consciousness. And we're a church who seeks to equip leaders to be able to see the map and create a safe space in this church, in that service, in this class, for members whose center of gravity is at any one of these stages. So I am not trying to get rid of my traditional center of gravity members. I'm not trying to change them. I do not have any desire for them to move along the developmental spectrum. What we believe is that healthy people grow. So if we can create a healthy environment here where my traditional stage friends can bring their gift to the party, likewise with modern and progressive, then they'll grow. And that's God's business, not ours. I want them here. I want them bringing their gift to the party. I want them in an environment in which it is safe in due time for them to look in the mirror at their own shadow and begin to put down the pathologies that their stage of consciousness has got exercising in them. One of the things we say about each stage is that each stage has its dignities and its disasters. Does that make sense? And if you look at yourself and you're marginally honest, you know that's true of all of us. So what's the birthplace of my dignities and likewise my disasters? Is it along this spectrum somewhere? I'm in a place, this parish church, that's safe to get real about that. So what I think you'll find, and I hope you'll find at Good Shepherd, increasingly, is that this is our approach. Some people say, well, I like Good Shepherd because I never hear y'all preaching about politics from the pulpit. Well, that's true, and you won't. But it's not because we're mealy-mouthed or trying to duck issues. It's because we're developmental. It's because in an 800-word or 1,000-word, 12 to 16-minute sermon, we're trying, or any other teaching, we're trying to talk about the basics, this, as I said today, the starting place, in a way that folks whose center of gravity is traditional, modern, progressive, or integral, which I think is probably a lot of our folks, can access it and be a part and partner with God in their own flourishing and in their own growth. Some people come to the church, this or any other, and want a real activist church where there's a lot of preaching and teaching about all manner of very particular sort of issue-based subjects. And that is available in other churches. Great, which is great. I think there should be a wide variety of churches. This church takes this intentional developmental approach. So the last thing I'll say about that is that this handout here, the multicolored one, is based on a pretty good study that breaks down where the general population of the United States of America is in this, as far as center of gravity. So you can kind of see, so traditionalists are 30%, most folks, modernists at 50, and progressives are 20. So you can kind of see with this simple graph, I bet, this simple illustration, why it's hard to get stuff done according to any one agenda. The numbers are just not in your favor. But you can maybe also see that from the integral perspective, you don't have to win. So it's the flourishing can happen because you're just trying to create a space in which everybody gets to bring what they have to offer to the party in a healthy way. It's a dance. It's difficult, it's subtle, it's nuanced, and it's the only thing that interests me anymore because I am not interested in the fight. It's just not something that lights me up in any way. But this, so one of the handouts you have is just kind of, for your information, the vestry, which is our leadership body, kind of like equivalent of a board, is actually doing an integral study this year. Every year we do a study, and we're doing an integral study all year long. We meet once a month, and we're going back and forth, looking through an integral lens at passages of Scripture and issues. So we're going to look at abortion, the death penalty. This month we're doing the resurrection scene of Jesus, baptism, Eucharist, through an integral lens, seeking to steelman or argue for traditional, modern, and progressive perspectives on these different subjects. Does that kind of make sense? So that we can enlarge in our own value landscape and better meet our members where they are. That's what I got. Questions, thoughts, comments on that or anything else as we end today's session.